Everton haven't found success for some time now, and it feels like they're getting worse and worse. The 27 years campaign amongst some of the most vocal Everton supporters is threatening to tack on yet another year. And despite investment into the club, there isn't much to show for it. In fact, with their current form, they feel like a club that's actually moving backwards. Hey there, I'm Adrian and welcome to Rabona TV. Welcome back to the previous subscribers. Do subscribe, by the way, if you find yourself enjoying the video, of course. Anyway, today we're going to look at what's going wrong at Everton, Moshiri, the 27-year campaign, and much more, with lots of insight from the great Alan Feely, a freelance journalist, the editor of Football España, as he's based in Spain, but an Evertonian above all. Not his first time on the channel either. Great to catch up with Alan. And if you want to keep up to date, up to the minute, I should say, on all things football, then the best tool for that would be from our sponsors, OneFootball, and their fantastic app. With OneFootball, when you follow the teams, players, and competitions that you are interested in, they will custom tailor your newsfeed to resemble that and send you only the most pertinent notifications that will ensure you know all. You'll be an all-knowing being. Plus, OneFootball is especially useful in January with their transfer trackers and ratings. You can watch all sorts of highlights, videos, and even live matches. Follow other matches with their match tickers and so much more. Use the link in the description or just scan this QR code and enjoy life as an all-knowing being when it comes to football at least. All right, let's get into the meat of this video. It's been a while since Everton have seen some success. Yes, David Moyes did some fantastic things with the club when it comes to making them a solid Premier League outfit, a very competitive Premier League outfit for long stretches of time. But beyond Moyes, Martinez did alright at times, and everything else has been quite forgettable. In fact, forget about being competitive. Everton haven't won a trophy since the mid-90s, back in 1995 with the FA Cup. That was the last time they won something, and that has led to the movement within the fan base to protest the running of the club, culminating in the walkout in the 27th minute against Arsenal, a match they won actually, a rare bright spot this season, as they sit in 15th place, just 8 points above relegation. For most born in my generation, it's startling form, considering what we saw from Moyes at the helm. But for those of the older generation of supporters, it's downright horrendous form.
It's now 27 years since Everton won a trophy, never mind the league title, a single trophy. And I'm 26, so I haven't been alive to see them win a trophy, basically. I was actually at the FA Cup final in 1995 when they won against Manchester United 1-0. But I was in my mother's stomach. I was like a few months from being born. So I was technically there, but I wasn't alive to see it happen, So basically what it stems from is that 27 years for a club like Everton is just unacceptable, because if you look at the all-time Premier League table and the all-time First Division table, Everton are right up there at the top, because they have not been relegated from the Premier League ever. They've not been relegated from the First Division in English football since the 1950s. They're a big club with big expectations, and they were winning league titles in the 1980s. And in the 1980s and going into the 1990s, when the Premier League came into being, Everton were one of the old traditional big four. If you look at league titles won, Everton have 9 league titles, 5 FA Cups, the European Cup Winners' Cup in 1985. They're a big club and they should be up competing amongst the big clubs, and it's not the case.
Farhad Moshiri is a billionaire businessman who had previously sunken some of his fortune into Arsenal, as he and his business partner, Alisher Usmanov, at one time owned around a 30% stake in the North London club. Moshiri changed his gaze up north to Everton, however, and upon selling his Arsenal stakes to Usmanov, he purchased a majority stake of 49.9% at Everton in February of 2016. Since then, Everton have gone through 5 managers in 5 seasons, with anything but success being brought to the club under the new owners.
When Farhad Moshiri bought into the club in the mid-2010s, it was expected that this is the time for Everton to step up, basically. They finally have the financial backing to go and challenge the bigger clubs. And they had performed well in the previous season, so the expectation was that they could finally push on. But it just didn't happen. And instead of, buying intelligently like they had been doing, they were paying over the odds for average players who were coming towards the end of their careers anyway, who were taking a step down as opposed to taking a step up. And as a result, you have a kind of a bloated squad full of overpaid players who didn't have the correct motivation that you need to break into the elite of the elite, you could say. And that's problem just gotten worse over the years, and the performances matched it. So what had been a talented team that was punching over its odds became a bloated team that's underperforming.
When you look at his tenure since February of 2016, and you compare that to the managerial changes and results in general, I guess you could say, it certainly doesn't paint a great picture of the ownership. So, Alan, is any of the criticism he and his board are getting, is it just overblown from the fans, or can the failures of the club really all just be a trickle-down effect from the leadership?
Oh, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. It's been chaos the way that Moshiri has controlled the club, because there's been no consistency, there's been no project, there's been no process. He's changed his mind several times. He went from appointing Ronald Koeman initially after taking over for Roberto Martinez, to then bringing in Sam Allardyce during that rocky period, to then going to Marco Silva, to then going back to, Carlo Ancelotti, and then going to Rafa Benitez. So you kind of have a mismatch of profiles there, because you have the fruits of maybe 4 different reigns who were involved in actually making it happen. Sam Allardyce players, you have Ronald Koeman players, you have Carlo Ancelotti players, you have Marco Silva players, you have Roberto Martinez players, you still have David Moyes players, and Seamus Coleman, he's the last one left, and you also have Rafa Benitez players. So it's quite a mismatch, you could say.
There's quite the trend in football where newly minted clubs have more money than they know what to do with, responsibly at least, to the point where the money and that ability to attract bigger names in football hurts the club more than it helps it. It's a scattergun approach, especially when those in charge of the decision making don't really have a brain for the game. To aid that, Everton made the smart move, at least in principle, of bringing in Dutch former player turned respected director of football, Marcel Brands. At this time, he was doing great things at PSV, helping them to multiple league and cup titles in his 8 years with the club.
And the hope with Marcel Brands was that he'd be the man to overlook the whole footballing operation and make sure all the thinking was joined up. But he was never given free rein. He was undermined, and Moshiri was signing players like Alex Iwobi, and he tried to sign Wilfried Zaha, and he was doing it because of conversations he was having with agents, not in conjunction with the football operations of the club. So Marcel Brands was given a remit of, lowering the average age of the squad and building a team that was competitive and that was developing in the long term. But he wasn't given the tools to do that, because Moshiri kept going over his head. I mean, obviously Ancelotti's profile speaks for itself, and he's a fantastic coach, but he never matched up with Marcel Brands. So it was kind of like you have a guy who's making signings for the long term, and you have a coach in Carletto who's making signings for the short term, bringing in Alan, James Rodriguez, the likes of these players. Marcel Brands has since left the club, and now almost all the control of the club has been handed over to Benitez. He's making decisions that are, going to have results for many years to come based on whatever he thinks is best, in conjunction with the owner. Lucas Dean leaving imminently is another example of that. He's spent money. You can't criticize him for that. He's not put the financial benefit of the club ahead of the sporting benefit of the club. He's building a new stadium. He has backed his coaches, but he's been too inconsistent with his appointments. He's not let the football people run the club, and that's led to the situation we're in today. It's been mismanagement of epic proportions. And if you look at the last 5 to 6 years of the club's trajectory, its failure is purely down to Moshiri, because the club is in a worse state now than it was when he took over, even though they've spent 400 to 500 million euros.
So would you say that with some fans, if they were given the opportunity to have Moshiri as the owner who strictly is funding the club, but he hands over a lot of the running of the club, a lot of the footballing decisions to a director of football or to people with better football brains, let's just say, do you think that people will be open to it? It's not necessarily get rid of Moshiri completely, or more just bring in the correct people to actually organize the club and run it?
Absolutely, but I mean, he hasn't done that, and he won't do that, because it's his money at the end of the day. He's seduced, in my opinion, by Hollywood names. He likes the idea of bringing Carlo Ancelotti. He made a bid to sign Diego Simeone at one point. He's not giving the football people the trust to make those decisions. We had Marcel Brands, who was highly rated, coming in from PSV. I did a very good job there. We thought that he was the answer to our problems, basically, but he wasn't given the bandwidth to work. Given the way Moshiri has operated in the years since he's been in charge of Everton, there's no way he'd ever take a back seat and let the football people run the club, no matter how much he trusted them, because that's just not his style. He likes hobnobbing with agents He likes having a say in transfers. He likes, being involved in the decisions. So he'll never veto control as much as we'd like him to be honest.
From Koeman to Allardyce to Marco Silva, Ancelotti, and now Rafa Benitez, it's been a whirlwind of managers at Everton, a whirlwind that seemingly scoops up and tosses the managers before they can get settled at the club. Besides Ancelotti, of course, as he chose to leave for Real Madrid. Rafa Benitez is a name that would often come up whenever there was a vacancy at a Premier League club, largely down to the goodwill he built regarding his time at Newcastle and how he fought for the club, seemingly against the previous owner, Mike Ashley, at times. But for Benitez to land at Everton of all clubs was quite a surprise, thanks in part to his Liverpool affiliations from the past, and not only that, before responding to a question about Everton's negative tactics that he said, quote, "We were trying, but when you play with a small club, it's difficult. They play deep, and they tried to do the same." And so the man that is, or has a lot of the control at the moment, as you mentioned, is Rafa Benitez. And, he's a guy who, of course, everyone points to the fact that he called Everton a small club in the past when he was with Liverpool. So considering everything that's sort of associated with Rafa Benitez and his previous run-ins, we'll call them, with Everton, was this something that was just doomed from the start because the supporters never really got behind him? Or do you think that the supporters were actually open to supporting him so long as you said, there was a cohesive look to this team?
They were definitely open to him. I think that the narrative around Everton supporters and Benitez has been blown out of proportion. It's been sensationalized because, there was a few idiots who were putting, the banners and stuff outside his house in Formby or in Liverpool before he was appointed. And there was a section who were very angry with the appointment as well. Can't lie about that. But I think the majority of Evertonians just want the club to do well. And it's not been doing well. The way the fixtures worked this season, it was obvious that the beginning to the season was quite simple, quite easy, a lot of winnable games, and everyone was fully fit. So they did win a lot of games and started the season very well. But as soon as the going got a bit tough and we missed a few players through injury, things just went to pot basically, and things went very, very wrong. And it was always the case that once things went wrong, he had very little credit in the bank to overcome that, to ride that wave out in a way, say, Carlo Ancelotti had, because we trusted Ancelotti. His record spoke for itself, whereas Benitez hasn't enjoyed success in quite a long time. And I think that a lot of people who were against his appointment made the argument that he is in the category of managers like Jose Mourinho, guys who were fantastic in the mid-2000s to late 2000s, but football has moved on since then. His whole selling point is coaching defensive scenarios and building a defensively strong team, whereas modern football coaches like Graham Potter, for instance, are at the upper echelons. You've Jurgen Klopp and Pep Guardiola and Thomas Tuchel. They focus on both defensive patterns of play and attacking patterns of play, and they build a cohesive team. That's the way modern football operates, whereas I don't believe that Rafa does that. I think he's micromanages the defenders and doesn't work enough from the attacking elements of play. Everton are getting the worst of both worlds. They're getting results football with no results. I mean, like I said, the run of form they're on at the moment is relegation form. It's just complete chaos, and it's just it's very, very difficult at the moment, to be honest, to be an Everton supporter.
Let's look to what you would like to see happen at the club in order for it to improve, because one thing that I see coming up a lot is how people want to see a return to the roots in some ways, focusing on the academy a little bit more, because now you are spending money. There's some that feel like the academy is being sort of ignored a little bit. But when you look at a club like City, for example, with all the spending that they do, they still do manage to give some opportunities to your Fodens, your Palmers, etc. So is this an area that you think that Everton could improve upon, is reintegrating some of the academy boys? And what else would you like to see happen in order to improve the club? Would that be bringing in a director of football, what have you?
It takes time for these things to happen. And I think that the reason their takeover has been so successful is that they've been allowed to run the club from a football perspective as opposed to an owner's perspective. So unlike Moshiri, who's effectively playing football manager, they've given controls of the club to the likes of Cheeky Bergenstein and Ferran Soriano, football men who know what they're doing and who've been involved with successful clubs before, in this case Barcelona. And what City have effectively done is replicate Barcelona's system without the corruption, you could say, and without the inefficiencies that Barcelona have shown to have had since 2015. If Everton is to succeed, they need to replicate the model shown by clubs like Sevilla or Borussia Dortmund, clubs who, in Sevilla's case, for instance, are building a very experienced, here for the now competitive team that's basically funded by player sales. Players who are underappreciated jewels from France and from Argentina and from Portugal, who come into the club and perform at a high level because of a competent coach, a director of football who's in complete control in Manchi, and a board that lets him do what he wants because he's in charge of the club. He is the club. Whereas Everton are proving already that they're not going to give control of the club to a football man, to a director of football. So I really don't feel optimistic about Everton's short-term future because we've already had Marcel Brands and he's not being allowed to work, basically. So where does that leave us? What's the way forward? I don't know, to be honest with you. If you were asking me, I would like to hire a competent director of football and a young progressive coach, someone like Graham Potter, and give him 3 to 4 years to build a proper team, a project, not the short-termism that we're doing at the moment.
It's strange seeing Everton in this place. With the investment that they have done, with the managerial signings they have made, they are seemingly spending big to stay mid-table under Moshiri. A complete disconnect is within the club thanks to an owner who is reluctant to relinquish control to the people who should have it when it comes to making football decisions. It's difficult to find that balance. You need investment in the modern game in order to succeed, but what you do with that investment is far more important than the figures themselves. That's where Everton have fallen off, as they become another example of money alone not being enough to solve problems. In fact, more money at the club has caused even more problems. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, then do be sure to subscribe if you're new around here. Other than that, my name's Adrian. Another thank you to Alan for joining me. Be sure to check him out. I've posted his socials down below, and we hope to see you in the next video. Ciao.